Okay, good to go.
Right, so welcome to our 2024 State of the Environment workshop. I'm going to give a brief overview of what the state of the environment is, and followed by our staff, which are going to talk to each of the sections of it. 2.3 million hectares, 500 kilometres long, over 700 lakes and 17 freshwater catchments. Our region has experienced New Zealand's most intense rainfalls and swiftest river flows. Understanding our environment is the first step to its protection, to ensuring that the land we live on, the water we swim in, and the air we breathe continues to support us and generations to come. Our State of the Environment report not only supports a better understanding of our environment for its protection, but also provides the data to support current and future use of natural resources. Can we farm more, extract more, build more houses? If so, where? What values are under threat, and what could we utilise to be more successful? This report provides the data that can help us as a region to grow. It ensures that the facts to support development through the use of our natural resources can help grow our economy. Environmental science can often be seen as a barrier to development, a part of council that stops us from using our resources and hampering growth. I'd like to flip that on its head. This document and the data within it does not prevent or stop regional development. It informs it. It helps us make good decisions on where and how we can manage our resources sustainably. It helps us navigate that fine line between a thriving economy and thriving ecosystems. Environmental reporting and monitoring is an asset to developers as much as it is a requirement. It ensures that we can back up our decisions with good quality information on cause and effect. The data from this report guides our staff and ultimately you as decision makers on what we do now and how we plan for the future. Our staff will be providing a snapshot on the state and trends of two of our most important resources, air and water, and two of our emerging threats, the spread of invasive species and our changing climate. Staff will explain what we know now, what we're doing, and where we're heading. I'll now pass to Senior Environmental Officer Emma Perrin-Smith to shed a light on the quality of our air. Emma's a great lover of science, a good pub quiz, and 10,000-piece puzzle. Emma uses her Bachelor in Biological Science and 16 years experience to help our teams analyse and interpret data for its use in decision-making across land, water, and air, which she'll speak to now. Over to you, Emma.
Thanks, Sharon.
Oh, actually, I forgot to talk about the climate. Sorry. No, back to me. I want to talk more. Sorry. So I'm going to give a real brief overview on our changing climate. So as you all know, we're the wettest region in New Zealand, with the Crop Waterfall Station at the river, providing New Zealand the greatest total rainfalls and most intense rainfalls in the country. Climate science is telling us that rainfall will increase by up to 30% over the next 50 years in the West Coast. We're a temperate climate now, and that's expected to get warmer, with Reefton being the area that has the lowest temperatures and the highest temperatures across the West Coast. Our sea level is also rising, and our coastal towns are exposed. So what are we doing about this? Our teams collect river flow and level data and rainfall data to understand what is happening in our region and these changes. We also collect bed level data in our rivers, LIDAR and aerial imagery. This helps us to develop flood models to understand how our communities might be impacted. And this helps emergency management create evacuation plans to protect our community from our changing climate. We also upgrade and maintain 22 flood and coastal protection schemes. This helps protect our communities and economic growth across the West Coast. Where are we heading? Considering climate change and plan reviews. So we're undertaking the Coastal Plan Review, which is a key hazard to our communities and really important for resilience. We incorporate sea level rise into our hazard mapping, including inundation mapping of towns, but also into coastal planning in the TTPP. We also are improving our groundwater quantity knowledge, which helps us understand where people can live in the future. This all wrapped up into a 10-year natural hazard strategy, which is helping our communities and their resilience towards our changing climate. And now I will pass to Emma, who I've already introduced, to talk about air quality.
Thanks, Shaz. And good morning, everyone. So what are we doing about air quality monitoring on the West Coast, and what do we know about the state of air quality? Well, we have one permanent monitoring site on the West Coast located in the beautiful town of Reefton. We've been monitoring air quality here since 2006 continually. We monitor air quality by something called PM, or measuring PM, which is particulate matter or small airborne particles in the air. There's two ways we monitor that at Reefton. That's PM10 and PM2.5. Now they just refer to different sizes of particles essentially. PM10 are coarser particles up to 10 microns in size. PM2.5 are your finer particles up to 2.5 microns, which is a bit of science jargon, but there's a wee picture here just showing the size of those particle types compared to one human hair. So really, really small particles. So we can have natural and anthropogenic sources of PM. Any sort of particles in the air could be harmful, but it's the anthropogenic or the human produced particles which we have the ability to influence. PM, or particulate matter in the air, can have health impacts on people. That's why we monitor it, especially long-term exposure to for vulnerable people. So people with respiratory conditions or the elderly, they can be more impacted by particulate in the air. PM2.5 is considered more of a health risk to people. Its smaller size means it can get deeper into your lungs and even into your bloodstream. So cardiovascular and respiratory issues are some of the things which can be caused or affected by particulate in the air. We have a national standard in New Zealand for PM10. This is a daily average of no more than 50 micrograms of per cubic meter of PM10. We currently have no national standard for PM2.5, but we have international guidance such as the World Health Organization guidance or guidelines on PM2.5. In 2020, our government did propose some amendments to our national environmental standard for air quality, and one of those was a proposed change from a PM standard for PM10 to a PM2.5 standard. Now, what would that mean for us? That would mean we would have to monitor something different. We might monitor in different ways in different places, and it might have impacts on the management of air quality in our region. In Reefton, our permanent monitoring site, we've had numerous exceedances of the National Environmental Standard for PM10 since 2006, and that's shown in this graph at the top here. The bars showing the number of exceedances per year, and the red line is that national standard. You can see there we've had numerous exceedances, and there was a significant change from 2016 that is due to the relocation of our site, unfortunately due to the sale of our original location. And I'll touch on that a little bit more as we go through. But because of our history of exceedances in Reefton, it is classified as a polluted airshed under the NES. That means we have to meet the NES for PM10, so no exceedances of that for 5 years in a row before we can consider to stop monitoring in that airshed. So we're bound to that by legislation. We are allowed one exceedance per year under the legislation. Any more than that, and we're in breach of the NES. And we have breached the NES in winter 2025. So we will be monitoring in Reefton for at least another 5 years. The NES for air quality also directs councils to monitor anywhere in their region where the air quality standard for PM10 is likely to be exceeded. Some surveys that we have done of airborne particulates in other towns have shown the potential that we could exceed the standard elsewhere. This image here just showing an output from a Greymouth survey done last year, showing some red areas here with elevated particulate there. And Reefton and Westport, we've undertaken some PM2.5 monitoring in those towns. And they have shown that they would be unlikely to meet a proposed PM2.5 standard, and that's comparing to World Health Organization guidelines, which our government has suggested we might follow if our national standard went that way. So that's just something we need to keep in mind as we move forward with air quality monitoring on the West Coast. It's not law yet to monitor and report on PM2.5, but it might be something that's coming. And just to note that PM, or that airborne particulate, is a winter issue on the West Coast. We see it in our Reefton long-term data records and elsewhere that we monitor. We see exceedances only over those winter months, and that's driven by emissions from home heating, essentially. So what are we doing? We're collecting more data than ever before in the world of air quality on the West Coast. We're investing in more instruments, investigative reference NES. Don't worry about those names particularly, but essentially different types of instruments. They allow us to monitor in different ways. More instruments means that we can collect more data and more quality data, which is helping to inform us about the air quality state on the West Coast. In Reefton, we're continuing our long-term monitoring there as per our NES requirements. We've also undertaken some additional surveys. Got some images here from one from 2021. So the surveys in Reefton were done to get a better idea of spatial spread of air, smoky air, PM, particulates in the air in the winter months, driven by those differences we saw in those two sites. The surveys showed us that average particulates in the winter months are kind of similar at those two locations shown with the stars, but the maximum concentrations that we see were higher at our original site shown with the blue star. Green one is our current site at the area school. So, yeah, so that has aligned with what we've seen in the number of exceedances we've measured. And we're now monitoring at both of those sites. So we've gone back to our original site as of winter last year, and we are monitoring and reporting exceedances from both of those sites as per requirements under the NES. So that's meaning we're sort of providing better information to our public really on the quality of air in Reefton. Now we've also been monitoring PM 2.5 in Reefton, and that's been since 2019, and that was made possible due to the purchase of an additional instrument to allow us to do that. As I said, there's not a legal requirement for that yet, but it's helping us gather baseline information, which will be useful should a change come down the road with that national standard. And wider West Coast monitoring. So prior to this program, this wider West Coast monitoring program, we hadn't monitored outside of Reefton for about 20 years. So we embarked on a program to monitor some other towns. What did we do? Over the last few years, we carried out surveys in Westport, Greymouth and Hokitika. These surveys were done over the winter months, looking at smoky air, so airborne particulates. And we used a network of low-cost sensors, well, actually these kind of ones here, these are little purple air sensors, and we can put lots of these around a town and collect some kind of cheap and cheerful data. We can't compare that data to national standards, but we can produce maps that give us an idea of spatial variation in particulates over a town. This example here is just a network of sensors we had in Westport. This is 2022, and an output from that. Basically what we're looking for with these surveys is, does it look like there might be any issues that we need to investigate further? If there is, we bring in one of our fancier high quality machines and we collect longer term data with one of those. And that's a machine where we can compare that data to a national standard, and we can actually see, do we exceed the standard and do we need to do more monitoring? We installed a monitor in Westport where that star is, and we ran that for a couple of years. We did not measure any exceedances at that site in Westport. But yeah, there's a lot of variation with air quality. It varies over space, over time. Meteorology has a lot of impacts on it. So it's a tricky thing to monitor. But yes, as of yet, we haven't recorded any exceedances of the national standard in Westport. And this winter, we're undertaking some of that, what I've called continuous monitoring. Essentially, one of these fancy high quality machines is running in Greymouth, and we're going to see if we exceed the standard at all over winter in Greymouth. In Westport, another piece of interesting work we did was looking at the source of these particles that we're measuring. So where are they coming from? So we have machines, reference machines, I haven't in my previous slide, which measure PM on little filters like this, well, these exact filters, these are possibly from Westport. And we get GNS to analyze essentially the black stuff on the filters, and they can tell us where that's come from with their fancy science. That showed four main types or sources of particulate in Westport, some natural ones, sea salt and soil, as well as motor vehicle emissions and the big one here being biomass combustion, which is essentially smoke from fireplaces, home heating. At 87% of PM 2.5 was that emissions from fireplaces. You'll see that PM 10 over here, that's those coarser particles. That captures a lot more soil and sea salt with that measure. PM 2.5 is actually a better measure of the anthropogenic or human-produced particulates, especially in places like Westport on the coast, where we're seeing a lot more sea salt coming in the PM 10 source. And nitrogen dioxide and sulfur dioxide, we also have national standards for those in New Zealand. As part of our wider West Coast survey, we did some monitoring of those in Reefton and Westport. We have these little tubes way up on poles, and we ran them in similar networks to this. We found no issues with those, and that confirmed for us that we just needed to focus on PM. Resources are kind of limited, so it's good to focus on what's really important. And where are we heading with air quality? Well, we're continuing to monitor air quality in Reefton. We know that we have intermittent issues in Reefton with poor air quality over the winter months, and we have legislation requirements to continue our monitoring there. Elsewhere on the West Coast, we're still undertaking that work to see if there's anywhere else we need to be doing further monitoring. So we're in this investigative phase still currently, with work still underway in Greymouth and Hokitika. After this winter, we'll decide if we need to do anything more in those two towns. This is just a picture of our current house here. We have the option of revisiting Westport in future. As I said, there's a lot of variability with air quality. And we didn't measure any exceedances, and we paused our monitoring there to allow us to bring our equipment to Greymouth. But it might be somewhere we review in future, depending on our prioritisation of work. More investigative monitoring. We're almost at the end of our wider West Coast survey, and we now own a whole lot of these little investigative monitors, thanks to the investment in our air quality program. So we could deploy those in other towns in some subsequent winters and collect more data on the wider West Coast air quality state. Source apportionment studies, what I mean by that is the analysis of filters to see where the particulate's coming from. We're actually getting that work done on filters, or looking to have that work done on filters from Greymouth this winter. And that kind of data could just help us down the line if we have to sort of undertake any management of air quality. It's really interesting and useful information to have. And we are still awaiting updates to that national standard. Currently, PM10 is our national standard. If it changes to PM 2.5, it's likely that sites won't comply. And that's not just Reefton, that could be other towns on the West Coast that we don't currently undertake permanent monitoring at. And so there might be more requirements for air quality monitoring on the coast in the future. And just a wee graph there, just showing the PM 2.5 data from our newer area school site at Reefton compared to two World Health Organization guidelines, older one and the more recent lower one there, and the number of times that we exceed those standards. So that's just something that we have to bear in mind as we move forward with our air quality sampling on the coast and requirements for the future in that space.
Thanks, Emma.
Thank
There'll
you.
be opportunities to ask questions at the end. We've got a limited time, so I'm going to move straight on to Johnny. Johnny's well known across the coast for always lending a hand when needed. He uses his environmental science degree and 20 years experience to help everyone and anyone who will listen understand more about the state of our environment. Johnny has a wealth of knowledge across all resource science disciplines, but today he'll talk to us about the state and trends of our water.
Thanks, Shanti. I wasn't emotionally prepared for such a glowing introduction. My blushing. Right, thank you. I'm just going to touch now on surface water and groundwater quality. A bit of a whirlwind. I've got 8 slides, and I'll try not to go into too much detail. Firstly, just to kia ora everybody as well, and kia ora Francois and those online. Just quickly touch on some of the key things we're doing at the moment. A big chunk of what we do is servicing our monthly sampling from Okarito to Karamea, 44 river sites. And we do a really broad range, measure a broad range of things here. I've got a few props, which I'll pull up. We send samples away to the lab, and they've got expensive equipment there, which they do things like nutrients and bacteria, E. coli. There's things that we have to do on site because if we send it away, it'll be different. We've got the best of the best instrumentation that we calibrate religiously in order to get the best data that we can. Things like this, which we carry around, it measures oxygen and the amount of sediment in the water, all sorts of things. We do bugs every year at pretty much all of our sites, and you can pass that around. I got these this morning. I was wading into New River about 15 minutes ago, and my brogues getting samples. Some of those are still alive. They're called macroinvertebrates, insect larvae, and they tell us a lot about the health of a waterway, depending on how many and what sort you get. This is another thing we do on site, which is essentially measuring clarity. It's just we measure how far away we can go from that black disc before we can't see it. That's our measurement. Simple, effective. Yeah, that's some of the things we do at these sites. So this is probably the main chunk of our program. Of course, contact recreation over summer. A lot of you guys will be aware of the work there, making sure the lakes, rivers, and ocean sites that people like to swim in are safe to swim in. Mainly weekly, some of them are bi-weekly. Another thing we started doing in earnest about 10 years ago is what I would call high frequency monitoring. So we pick sort of key sites, as many as we can over the longer months of the year. And again, more fancy technology. So this is a bigger version of this, and it's got a logger, and there's a handful of things you can measure with an instrument. And while you're sleeping in bed, this thing can be taking a sample every minute. So opposed to, say, this program at the top here, where we'll get, with monthly sampling, we'll get 12 turbidity measures over a year. Over the course of a week, or a couple of weeks, this could get thousands of turbidity oxygen measurements. So it fills in those gaps there with things that might change quite rapidly over the course of a day, that kind of thing. So we've got a whole bunch of data using this kind of thing. What else? Lakes were picked up using contractors, divers. They annually, it ties in with the biosecurity work, so we're saving some costs there. Doing plant surveys of some of our most accessible lakes. Actually, last summer we did some alpine ones as well to try and get more reference information. We've picked up that in the last sort of 5 years. Also, we go up on boats periodically to our lakes and get water chemistry measures. eDNA has been a bit of a game changer. That tells you a lot about what's in those waterways and the health of waterways. Special projects, a lot of you are familiar with Waimea, that's helping with the sort of science aspects of consenting and compliance in that catchment. Orowaiti Lagoon, helping the Buller District Council and trying to answer questions for them, and Ngāi Tahu, Paitini Ngāi Tahu. Joint research, this is something we did a lot earlier in the year, working with Niwa and DOC on some research projects which fed into the National Fish Passage Guidelines Mark II. And if you look at those guidelines, they're very comprehensive. On the front cover of those guidelines, there's a picture that Cohen Beats, who's in the catchment team here, took of Mill Creek. So, we're part of those leading the way type projects, as well as doing our local thing. Estuary health, another thing we've been embroiled in recently, from the top to down to Hapoka. We've been doing a synoptic survey of estuary health to help inform policy changes and things like that. So that's just some of the things we do. Now, I've wrapped up the state of rivers in one slide. It's not everything we do, but these are some of the key things that we do. They're useful, and we have to do it because central government, courtesy of the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management, say we have to do it. And that legislation also sets out criteria. Green's A is good, down to orange, which is D, and in most cases will be what they call below or bottom line that we need to be above. Fecal contamination, E. coli, that has an E, the rest are just A to D. So along here, we've got the number of our sites that are in these different categories over the last 10 years. It's important to note that the majority of our sites have catchments with at least a little bit of human activity. Some of them have a lot of human activity. There's not many reference sites. So it's kind of biased in terms of most of these sites have a reasonable amount of human activity in them. But you can see that there's a range from good to bad across the board. So nitrogen, I've tried to use sort of lay-friendly terms as well here. These aren't scientific terms. Hopefully they make a little bit more sense. When I talk about nitrogen toxicity, I'm talking about ammonia. Ammonia comes from cow urine, point source discharges, fertilizer, things like that. And it can be toxic. Out of all the nitrogenous sources of nitrogen, it's generally considered the most toxic. So we've got nothing below the bottom line. That's good. But we've got a few there that could do with a little bit of improvement. We could describe things like ammonia as low-hanging fruit because it's associated with point sources. It's generally easier to address than things that are, come from everywhere and that are hard to get a handle on. So not too bad for ammonia. Muddy water, I'm talking about this thing here. And clarity, we use that as a surrogate of the amount of sediment in the water column. So we see a few sites here below the bottom line. Sources of sediment in this case, in most cases, would be earthworks, how people manage bare ground, hugging, mine rehab, those sorts of things. On some catchments, it's harder to manage sediment than others because they've got soft geologies and things like that. So there's some natural characteristics in the mix there as well. Oxygen, we need oxygen. Those little critters, these need oxygen, and some of them aren't getting enough oxygen, and they're carking it. But yeah, we measure that with those sondes and instruments like that. Again, we do get some hot, dry periods where, combined with the heat, we're getting a lot of algal growth. If it's not sunny, plants and algae just use oxygen, and we can see that every now and then there's some sites that get quite low in oxygen. Things like riparian shade would assist with that. Phosphorus, this is mainly the dissolved forms, typically comes from human activity. It could be, again, fertilizer or other kind of intensive farming land uses are the main sources of it. Again, we've got a few there just below the bottom line. Phosphorus is expensive stuff. So if you knock that back and got rid of some of that orange, it's probably a win-win. You'd be saving some people some money because it takes a lot of money to buy fertilizer and things like that. So maybe there's some room for some win-wins in the phosphorus area. Slimy stones, I'm talking about algal growth. Again, hot, dry summers. This is when we can get these periods where you get tons and tons of algae. So it's a combination of the weather, which we can't do anything about, but things like nutrient management, riparian shade can also help. Fecal contamination, we measure E. coli. This one's got an E category. That's a bit scary. It's worth noting, though, with the criteria that we measure this by, the statistical method, that it relies a lot on spikes. So even if it's pretty good most of the time, because we're a very high rainfall place, we often get big spikes in E. coli, which is one of the reasons why we're seeing that big red blob there. But to be fair, there are times when some of our waterways have high E. coli and it's not raining. So there's probably not as bad as it looks, but there is room for improvement. Too hot, temperature. We've got lots of temperature loggers that have lived in some of our waterways for 10 years now. They measure every 15 minutes, doing their thing. And again, it's quite surprising. We're described as a cool, wet climate here, but now and then it gets hot and it gets dry. And again, riparian, things like that will assist there. Critter health, that's these bugs here, and fish. And really what we're seeing there is a culmination of all these things here that affect the bug communities that we measure every year. And we've got a range, but most of these catchments have human activity. And as you can see, we've got a few good ones and then a few there that could do with improvement. There might be some intrinsic things, sort of slow flowing, which doesn't help, but there's some human factors there in the mix that could be tweaked to make things better. So that's state. Keep mashing buttons. Trends, again, one graph. Well, the main thing to note here is that most of the sites in the last 15 years haven't had any meaningful change. That's the grey. The orange declining quality. The blue is improving. So ammonia, talked a bit about that, where that comes from. Just a few there. In some catchments, getting better, getting worse. It might be, and it applies to a lot of these typically farm-related nutrient type things, where one catchment might have had intensive farming for a long period of time and they've sort of been tightening up over the years. You might see an improvement. Other catchments, you might see greater intensification, bringing in land that's been pretty scrubby or what have you, and then that more input in there to get more productivity. And you can see some of these things declining. The ammonia, the sites that have been declining are ones that have very little ammonia. So in a way, that's good. Nitrate, all of the sites on the West Coast are in the A category, so have low nitrate, which is pretty typical for the West Coast. Total nitrogen pretty much reflects those two, but a greater range of things. Dissolved phosphorus, slightly different story here. The sites that are declining or increasing in phosphorus, which is not good, they tend to be the sites which already have quite high phosphorus. So again, maybe a bit of work to be done in that area and some money to be saved with more efficient use of phosphorus and retaining it on the land. Total phosphorus, it's affected by a greater range of things. Really what this tells us is that most of the decline is a result of human activity, whereas there's other natural things involved with total phosphorus. E. coli, mainly no change, but a bit like phosphorus, the ones that have been declining have been in like a poor category for E. coli, so a bit of work to be done for those sites because a lot of those ones that are declining have high E. coli levels. Clarity and sediment, again, most of these sites have pretty good clarity, but some catchments there could be more work done to retain it. And dissolved salts connectivity, it's just a rough surrogate of sort of water quality, and it can be affected by climate and things like that. So not a lot of patterns there, but mainly improving. So moving right along. Oopsie, I was supposed to press those buttons. Never mind. Lake Brunner, huge effort in Lake Brunner. Once a month we go out there and do a really large range of tests. I've summed up all that work into one sentence. Safe for swimming, Lake Brunner, low nutrients, nitrogen's going up, which we're not massively concerned about because it's phosphorus limited and nitrogen's less important. And we're keeping an eye on oxygen at the bottom of the lake bed, because if oxygen gets too low at the lake bed, weird things can happen with the chemistry and it can go downhill. It might be climate related, it might be human related. It's probably a combination, but it's pretty complicated stuff. So far, so good with Brunner. So watching brief there. I talked about those plant surveys in the lakes and that we've been doing the last few years, and good to moderate high impact in terms of the communities, plant communities. For those sites that we've had more than one sample, we get a bit of an idea if things are getting better or worse, but it'll tease out more in the future when we get more samples. So it's early days, but we can see lakes like Kangaroo, Kanyeri, Maporika, increasing native plant health and decreasing invasive plant health, which is a good thing. And then there's some sites that we want to keep an eye on because the native plant communities might be deteriorating a bit, like Brunner, and there's an increase in invasives. That might be because there's something new that's got in there, like Paringa, which is Lagosiphon, or it might be sort of long-term changes with some of those invasive ones that have been in there for a long period of time. So yes, it's worth keeping an eye on that just to see where it goes. It could be human activity, but it's climate change could be a major part in this as well, because a lot of these lakes don't actually have a lot of human activity in them. So it's always important to tease out or try and tease out the difference or the drivers, whether it's human or whether it's things that are beyond your control. And a bit like what we looked at before, the ABCD, most of our lakes, pretty good in terms of nutrients, A's and B's. Brunner's not here, but Brunner is A's and B's. Lake bed oxygen, another example of natural things having an influence. So those Ds are due to sort of natural characteristics of those lakes, not because anybody's done anything bad in the catchment. So it's a good example of having to tease out a difference between natural drivers of these scores and things that people do. So groundwater. Now, we measure heaps of stuff from our groundwater program, but I'm going to zero in here just on E. coli. Don't freak out too much here. These are all the different bores, the sites we have. Across here, this is the number of samples we've collected at each site, and these are the time blocks. So the 5-year time blocks for E. coli, 99 to 2004, 5 years, right up to 2019 to 2024. I guess the key things here overall is that we've increased a lot in the number of sites that we measure over the years. We've collected a lot more samples over the years. And a good thing is that, so the grey is meeting the drinking water standard for E. coli. The orange is failing the drinking water standard for E. coli. And we can see in more recent times that these wells are meeting the drinking water standard for E. coli a lot more frequently, which is good news. They fail a little bit. It's also important to note that none of these sites are actually municipal drinking water supplies. So if they were, they'd probably be doing a lot more to ensure that there's no E. coli. So it's just gives us a bit of a feel for what's happening in aquifers around the region. So yes, drinking water standard for E. coli, less than 1, and more sites, more samples. We also measure other things that relate to the drinking water standard, maximum allowable values, things like iron and manganese. Sometimes these exceed, normally they're pretty good. They're not a human health issue, they're aesthetic, they make your washing go brown if you pump the groundwater straight into your washing machine. So not a big deal, and mainly they're pretty good. Unimpacted aquifers with nitrate levels of less, generally levels of nitrate less than 1.97. So 11% of these groundwater sites are below that and considered unimpacted, but all of these sites are in catchments where there's, farming and human activity. So it stands to reason that only 11% of sites are in that category. Trends for groundwater. Whoa, okay. Again, this is trends. Don't worry about the details. You can't see them. I can hardly see them. But red is declining, blue is improving. I'll just zero in on a couple of key measures here. The last 10 years, last 20 years, last 30 years. So just some key things to pull out of here. Firstly, nitrate. Nitrate can affect respiration. It's on the radar with drinking water, particularly groundwater sources, and people are concerned about it. See in the last 30 years that more sites have been declining in nitrate levels, but that's not, it's sort of a 50-50. Horses for courses, different activities in each area, each catchment, each aquifer. So some sites have been getting better, some sites have been getting worse. Sort of a mixed bag. A weird thing that popped up, silica is increasing. We don't really know why, and also its friends, fluoride and bicarbonate, that often hang out together. So an increase in silica, GNS thinks this might be due to climate change, things like that. But yeah, we'll find out more about that. I better hurry up. So yes, ammonia. This is a great example of lies, damn lies, and statistics. It's not getting better. It's just that the lab got better at measuring it. So you have to be aware of these things. Touch very quickly on pesticides that we did in 2022. Looked at 195 pesticides at 18 wells. We only got 2 detections, and the one for chloropyrrolate was below the Australian drinking water standard. For chlorin wasn't particularly high. New Zealand was pretty much a good news story as well. So yes, pesticides in groundwater on the West Coast doesn't seem to be a problem. So wrapping up, where we're heading, we've just got to hang in there. As Emma said, and Samuel will talk about it, and the biosecurity dudes. We're doing more and more work all the time. So we just got to try to hang in there and keep producing good quality data. We're adding more reference sites. and using technology like eDNA, those fancy probes that I showed, just whenever there's new technology, we jump on it because we can get more data more efficiently. Groundwater aging is useful. We'll do more of that work for groundwater and using volunteers and just, working with the community more. I think we've been doing a lot more of that in the last few years, making use of them. Big thanks to the science team and everybody in the council. Big thanks to the councillors for supporting science in the last 20 years. Always been really, really supportive. So thank you. Keep it up.
Oh, thanks, Marty. Again, there'll be time for questions at the end if Bill allows us to go over a little bit. We are running a little bit over time, but Emily and Taylor are coming now to speak about our biosecurity work. Emily comes from a long line of pest plant enthusiasts, descending from ancestors that helped introduce gorse 7 generations ago for sheep, feed and fencing. Emily spent just over 3 years at council and has put her bachelor in ecology and biodiversity to good use, having worn several hats from killing possums to assessing fish passage for whitebait. Taylor has been fighting off pests on the West Coast for over 5 years. He puts to practice his postgraduate degree in environmental science and plant ecology through an immense passion to eradicate plants, white pampas in particular. Taylor and Emily will now share their work in supporting landowners to stop the spread of invasive species on the coast. Over to you.
Cool. I was asked to bring in samples, but Shanti said no to dead animals. And we've been working on woolly nightshade recently, and the leaves from that plant give me rashes and respiratory problems. So I didn't bring any of that in either, but there's gorse and blackberry out the window. Biosecurity is pest management, and as a regional council, we have a responsibility to understand pests in the region and to do something about their impacts on the environment, on the economy, and on us and our values. So here on the coast, historically, we've relied really heavily on the Department of Conservation to look after us in this space. Over the last 20 years, they've had funding cut after funding cut. And in 2021, dock rangers were instructed to cease all pest control on private land on the West Coast. So the regional councils had to step up. I'll give you a quick example of what's going out there in the environment. This was a pretty trendy plant, especially in the 90s, that people were putting in their gardens throughout the coast and throughout New Zealand. This is called Gunnera. About 20 years ago, we started to see scenes like this. So there's Gunnera growing out in the wilderness, pretty far from Nana's garden. And then if we fast forward to now, you get scenes like this. Here we've got a slip with probably 10 to 20,000 Gunnera plants. That little orange dot there is me. And underneath those plants, it's just mud and more Gunneras. So we know that we're starting to get problems out there. What happens with pests is after they're introduced, they tend to do very little for the first few decades. So they'll be out there, they'll be in the environment. Most people won't know that they're actually there. So you'll see nothing, 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 and then you'll get a population explosion all of a sudden. And that's when we start to see these pests and the public becomes aware of them. But that's also the point at which we're no longer able to eradicate them. And you give it a little bit more time, population densities build up, and that's where we start to feel the effects of the pests on our economy, on our environment. There's the Gunnera following this process. Nothing, nothing, nothing. A few Gunneras, and then a few thousand Gunneras. What we need to do on the coast, and what we've been doing over the last year, is trying to figure out where some of our most serious pests sit on that graph. That's really important so that we can make decisions about how we're going to manage them and understand what the West Coast is going to look like in the future. So here's 3 examples. That's woolly nightshade. That's very widespread up north. Here's purple pampas. That's also very widespread up north, and we're starting to see more and more on the West Coast. and there's gorse. Gorse is just about everywhere. So over the last year, Emily and I have been out and we've mapped where we can find these plants. So woolly nightshade on the west coast only exists in Westport, and there's one site down here in Barrytown. Purple pampas, over the last 5 years, it's probably spread into every catchment on the west coast. And it would probably make more sense to make a map of where gorse is not on the coast. So we haven't wasted our time with that. What we can do now is we can plot these onto that graph and figure out what they're going to look like in the future. So there's woolly nightshade right down the bottom. It's in the lag phase here, so most people on the coast don't even know what that pest is. Here's purple pampas, it's just above the blue line. That means we'll never eradicate this species. People are starting to see it out and about, but we're not feeling the effects of this pest plant yet. And there's gorse, probably over the coast, would be spending millions of dollars a year controlling this weed and would be losing millions in losses. So we can put all sorts of different pest plants and animals onto this graph. There's ragwort and there's deer. They're right up the top, so they're causing impacts on our economy. Goats and pigs are not quite at the top of this chart yet, so they're still spreading on the coast. They're going to get worse in future years. A couple of pest plants. There's Gunnera, which I showed you before. We look at the region as a whole, it's just above that blue line, so people are starting to become aware of this plant. This thing is Japanese knotweed. This is very common in greymouth, but not across the rest of the coast. So in England, I understand you can't get insurance on your house if you have this plant on your property. That's how serious it can be. On the coast, it's below the blue line, so it's still possible to eradicate this plant.
What does it do that makes it uninsurable?
Breaks through concrete, so it causes a lot of damage to infrastructure and buried pipes. And then a couple of things right down the bottom, that's yellow loosestrife, and that's a turtle, a red-eared slider turtle. So these only exist in one site each. And I'll quickly give you an idea of the scale of these things. So purple pampas, which is sitting in the middle, probably just above the blue line, collectively between DOC, us, and private landowners on the coast, about $500,000 a year is spent on this weed. That's enough to suppress it, but it's not enough to stop it from continuing to spread. So we're still going to see more and more of this in the future, and the spend is likely to go up. There's possums right up the top. So nationally, $60 million a year is spent on possums to protect the dairy and beef industry. And that's considered a good investment. Any conservation benefits that program gets are free, essentially. And that's yellow bristlegrass. So that's on the west coast. If that were allowed to spread right through our dairy industry, it would probably cause $20 million a year in losses. And it takes me 2 days to keep that weed under control per year. So we know that new pests are spreading on the coast. We know which ones we're going to start to see more and more of in the future. It's not only going to be gorse that you see out the window. And down the bottom of that chart, we've got about 20 pest plant species that we're looking at for eradication. So Emily's going to tell you what we're doing.
Thank you, Taylor. So, what are we doing? So, short version, referring back to Taylor's example before, we've got woolly nightshade, low incident plant. We are taking action here, controlling them. Purple pampas, so that fell within the middle of the graph. What we're doing, making sure we're going out searching for it, making sure we have a good understanding of what's going on out there in the environment. Gorse, widespread, we are not doing a lot. So these species we're selecting aren't random. We're choosing them on known impacts elsewhere across the country or in similar climates elsewhere across the world. So our plan currently recognises about 42 pest plants. But what does that actually look like in our program? So we do work across all three environments, land, water and sea. And the main thing, that could be broken down into 4 programs. So it's surveillance. Takes up most of our time. It's important to be effective in our work that we have a good understanding of what's going on out there. Most of this we do ourselves, going out and looking. We also, as Johnny touched on, get scientific divers in to do our aquatic environments, so freshwater marine. And we also use other tools such as eDNA, water samples, which picks up any DNA of things present in a water body. It's good for plants, pollen as well. So next one, education. So it actually in turn ends up being a passive form of surveillance. We've got more people who know about it, more eyes on the ground. Like I said, these pests are selected for a reason, so it's important for us to communicate the risks and impacts of these species if they were allowed to establish further. Hopefully you would have seen we started increasing our newspaper articles during Pests of the Month and Facebook posts. We also have a few education campaigns such as Check Clean Drive or the Weed Buster program that's going out and talking to people in their backyards, reaching people in the target environments. So the third one, pest control. When we find our low incidence priority pests, we control them. So our first option, service delivery, going out there. And so pest control also includes biocontrol, which is the introduction of a natural enemy. Things become pests and problem outside of their native range in absence of a natural enemy. Nationally, 35 plant targets have had agents released, 7 of those relevant to the coast. So it's something we're hoping to invest more in. And the fourth one, compliance. So this is a tool that only regional councils have, DOC or the likes don't. It's something we don't do a lot of, but it's available to us where our other education or service delivery have failed. And we would only consider it for our priority pests, which have pretty serious impacts if left. So all our work is, like most of the things, governed by plans. So these are community documents, and they're intended to reflect what our community values. Available on our websites and things, and we report on our progress to these regularly. So where we're heading, talking next 3 years. Sure. We hope to have a very good understanding of what's going on out there with our increase in surveillance, and also building our community and cross-agency networks and relationships. So we have a good relationship with DOC. We also get out there with likes of Kiwiwara. So increasing our eyes on the ground. We also hope to have a few quick wins under our belt. So there's a few species out there. We've got 1 or 2 locations, which we're putting lots of effort into managing. And then for the plants in the middle, we should have a pretty good understanding with our knowledge of the reason. And so also in the next 3 years, our plan is up for review. So this is due 2028. So we'll be reassessing our target species impacts, doing cost benefit analysis, making sure we're set up for the long term. We'll also consider adding things like goats or possums to our council plan. This would be aligning ourselves with the rest of the country. Yeah, so I'll just finish on a note. Biosecurity work does require investment, and it is intended in most cases to be a preventative action. So if we're doing our job well, tackling those low incidence species, chances are you won't notice anything. For the widespread pests, bit of a different story. Investment is required to keep those impacts down to a manageable level. Yeah, that's me.
Thanks, Emily. Last but not least, I'd like to introduce Samuel, who's dressed up for you today. Samuel is an artist at heart and a scientist in practice. He makes most of his master's degree in physical geography to lead our experienced hydrology team in the collection, analysis, and reporting of hydrometric data. Samuel is a local to the Australasian meat raffle and a great believer of innovation. He uses his practical skills and science know-how to weave together classic and modern hydrology practices. Samuel's here to talk to you about his work in understanding rainfall and river flows.
Hi everyone, thank you, Shanti. Just very briefly, this is a wonderful little piece of equipment that we use to calibrate our rain gauges in the field. What it does is it puts a very specific amount of water through a very small nozzle over a very specific amount of time. So I've come up with the innovative idea to use it as a timekeeper. So when we hit this line here, I've had 10 minutes. So anyway, we need to do that because I'll talk about this stuff for hours. So I get to present to you guys on river levels and rainfall. So this covers our surface water quantity work that we do for our state of the environment stuff. A lot of our network is geared around flood warning and flood management, but the way that we validate the data that we collect in the field and our data quality assurance program allows us to use this data and leverage it for looking at states and trends in things. So rainfall, so hopefully you're all quite familiar with this little picture here, which has come directly from our website. We operate an independent network of 31 rainfall sites across the region. 11 of those are in Buller, 10 are in Grey and 10 are in Westland. And in association with our partnership agencies like NIWA and Met Service and a couple of consent holders, we also have access to a further 24 rain gauges throughout the region. So yeah, it allows us to paint a really good picture every day of what's going on. All of this data is telemetered as live as it can be to us. And so we use this for sort of flood warning, tracking rainfall events up and down the coast, validating what the forecasts are actually, sort of whether the forecasts are accurate or not. And then sort of on top of that, the data can be used for a whole range of other things. So environmental design, rainfall analysis and stuff for engineers for stormwater design. NIWA use this network as well, along with the rain gauge network across the rest of the country for sort of online tools. And Met Service use and pull our data in as well for validating forecasts. So it kind of allows us to build a really nice picture across the coast of what rainfall looks like. This was done in 2012, but the data we've collected over this SOE period sort of validates this as well. On the right, so yeah, so as we all know, huge amounts of rain, over 7 meters of rain. That's the median annual rainfall each year. Quite dry spots though, up around the back of the Grey Valley and Westport. So the rainfall data we've collected over the past 3 years has deviated quite significantly from our long-term averages. We've had sort of 3 years that are all quite different from each other. So through our 31 rain gauges, 7 of them in Buller, so 7 of the 11 rain gauges we have in Buller recorded the largest rainfall totals in their respective records in 2021, 2022. That's sort of the lines, if you remember, with the large floods we had at Westport. And similarly, the lowest annual rainfall totals ever recorded were recorded at 6 sites in Buller and 7 in Grey over the 2023-2024 period. So a fair bit of variability. This plot here is the data we've collected over the past 3 years. And it's just showing you that we've got certain sites, certainly down in Westland, up in our alpine ranges, that are getting well in exceedance of 11 meters of rainfall per year, which is sort of the highest in the country. Yeah, so again, relative to the rest of the country, very wet, as we all know. We've got Hokitika and Westport up here with over 2 meters of rainfall annually, which is significant for lowland areas. So what I've done is we've sort of split this up into each calendar or each water year, and we've plotted on a plot here for this is for 2021, 2022, the percentage deviation from average annual rainfall. Dark blue being, much wetter than usual. reds that we'll see later on are much drier than usual. And so we can sort of see across the coast over the 2021-2022 water year that certainly around Westport and Greymouth, we had a much wetter year than the long-term average for those sites, up to 50% more rainfall than usual. Meanwhile, down in Haast, we recorded sort of below average totals in that year. So a bit of a spread there, but when we sort of compare it with the next year, we can sort of see that Westport, the back of the grey catchment was sort of about usual or slightly drier than usual. But Greymouth south to Fox Glacier was a fair bit, sort of 10 to 20 to 20 to 30% wetter than usual. So quite distinct patterns in rainfall across our catchments. And then when we look at the 2023 to 2024 period, dry. Certainly north of Hokitika, quite a lot drier than usual. Rainfall totals being sort of 17% below normal in Buller, 20 to 21% below in Grey. Westland still sort of being about normal or slightly below normal. So things in Westport, down in Haast, sort of were a bit more consistent than the rest of the region. So just placing this slightly in the context of climate, given that rainfall in New Zealand is heavily driven by what's going on in the oceans, the Pacific Ocean and stuff. This is our Southern Oscillation Index for ENSO. And you know, this here, July 2021, where we had about 2 degrees of forcing from what was going on, that was when we had one of our large floods in Westport. Similarly, the really dry period we've seen has just been associated with a La Nina cycle there. So moving on to river level and flow. This is sort of done in 2 parts on the coast, just to make sure that we're really efficient with what we do. We collect water level at a large number of sites up and down the coast using sort of little water watch radars, which we did in partnership with NZTA, which is sort of ping level. So we've actually got 9 of those in Westland, 4 in Grey and 1 in Buller. Meanwhile, every other site that we've got is water level that's recorded continuously and is surveyed to benchmarks. So where they're just water level sites, so for example, we've got 2 that we recently installed in Buller last year on the Ottawaiti and the State Highway 67 bridge. They're useful for engineers. Meanwhile, our rated flow sites, we have 9 in Buller, 6 in Grey and 7 in Westland, 2 of which are managed by NIWA. These rated flow sites mean that we can tie that water level, that continuous water level to flow. And flow is something that we can look at consistently across time. So again, this is used for environmental monitoring. Predominantly, the network's built around flood warning. It's useful for design flood analysis for engineers and scaling the size of events that we see. And environmental base flows and abstraction consents are tied for a couple of our sites. So key takeaways from summary flow statistics that we've seen. Largely, the largest flows that we saw all occurred in 2021, 2022. The event that drove those floods in Westport, these had return periods within our records of about 45 to 66 years, so very significant. Meanwhile, all the minimum flows that we recorded over the period all occurred in 2022, 2023, and that dry water year that we saw from the rainfall. So if we just look again at the distribution of this over the coast, again, 2021, 2022, we just saw things up around Westport, wetter than usual, flows higher than usual, about 30% higher than the long-term average. And their winters for this period were a bit wetter than usual. Moving on to the next water year, things up and down the coast sort of sat around normal or slightly below normal, and that's fairly consistent up and down the coast. And then our most recent year, where we saw that a lot of that really dry period of rainfall, we can see that was represented largely in a number of our flow sites, more significant flow sites. So yeah, just this quick one for Te Kuha, given how significant that flood event was. Largest flood event ever recorded. We've got plots like this for all of our rivers, so if you're interested in them, we can share them. But we're looking at the largest flow recorded in each year and the lowest flow recorded in each year, plotted with annual median flows. But we see just how significant that event was. And since then at Te Kuha, we've had sort of 2 events that are very sort of benign. So where are we heading? We're sort of heading in 2 key directions. One thing that we're really focusing is just increasing our site resilience and redundancy of our communication network at sites, just to make sure when floods are occurring, we are confident that our sites are going to survive. And we're confident we're going to get that data, which we really need for civil defence. A lot of things moving into the future for certainly in the South Island is a big push towards flood modelling, but your flood modelling is usually only as good as your network, and so there's a bit of a process at the moment where we're expanding that rain gauge network throughout the coast, largely from central government funding, and then a big focus on innovative technology like this. Just to allow us to gauge more, gauge faster, and get better information. SDIV and camera technology is something that we're also sort of investing in, and it has worked really well in our last few flood events. But it allows us to gauge rivers remotely from cameras, so that we don't have to be on site. And it sort of looks like this, where a video of the river is run through a piece of software, and it calculates the velocity of that water. Yeah, so.
Awesome, thank you. So you've been provided with a snapshot of the work that our teams do and been given an insight into the state of our environment. With this information, our planners will review regional plans, setting the rules and thresholds for development. Our regulatory team enforces these rules, and our team, we keep monitoring. Are our rules working? Are they still in line with our community's needs and wants? Are we comfortable with the rate of change in its direction? The cycle continues and underpins our function as a regional council. We hope that you look through the booklet in front of you, ask questions and propose new ideas, and ultimately gain a better understanding that the data collected day in and day out across hundreds of kilometres by our dedicated science officers not only benefits our environment, but also our region's communities, culture, and future economic potential. Thank you. Apologies for going over slightly.
Thank you.
Welcome to ask questions.
Oh, right.
Innovation.
Practice.
I've got a question for Sam.
Yep.
Has any research been done on the snow melt and the receding glaciers on the?
Not by us, but NIWA have been doing work on that. There's actually an online sort of forecasts what you might be getting as contributions to river flow from snow melt. So that information does exist.
Because our biggest floods are normally at Christmas from the northern rain melt and the snow, but there's not much snow up in the west. There won't be that much snow to come down in the summer.
Yeah, so people like to say rainfall on the coast averages out each year. So we're quite a bit below our average at the moment. So we'll see what happens over the next few months.
Yeah, and I saw it past that several years in a row. It's always that yellow. Like
Yeah.
it's been lower than normal for quite a number of seasons.
Well, it's not, yeah, I mean, that yellow is sort of 10% deviation from normal. So, I mean, given the nature of the catchment down there and hydrology down there and climate, it's sort of fairly consistent is sort of what it's saying. Whereas we've seen a much larger deviation in our northern catchments over the past 3 years.
Great.
Just one for the EF people. How much of the stuff that we have to do from the government is actually funded by the government?
None.
No. The other question was how much of the education on the pest plants is going into the schools?
The schools isn't something we've branched out into yet. There's just 2 of us. So we mostly we have done a couple of the days along with other.
It's good feedback though, and we can do more of that. We are looking at going to Grey District High School. Daryl's been in touch with the science department and delivering this presentation to them.
Yeah.
And we're always touching base. Our science team, in particular environmental quality, do a bit with schools. And the hydrology team has done a bit with Kumara and Moana School as well. But with the biosecurity team, we've worked a little bit with Papataio Earth Care, which is targeting students that are not doing so well in the traditional classroom environment, but are really interested in doing practical stuff, and biosecurity is really great for that.
It would be quite good in careers days as well, to
Yeah.
have something like this for them.
We did attend the careers day. Yeah, it was really good. Yeah.
Peter?
Mine's not really a question, Shanti, because I think we all need to absorb all this stuff and then come back to you. But I was lucky I got these books last night. I was here, so I got a bit of a chance to have a quick read last night. And I do know you're going to have this presentation going out for a whole lot of community sessions, which is going to be great. But for me, I just think this is an absolute first-class presentation and a document. And if I was Simon Cowell and this was a New Zealand's Got Talent, I'm pretty sure I would have the golden button by now. So thanks very much. I believe this is valuable information for the development and long-term climate impacts for our community. And I'm sure when you go out to the community, you guys, you'll get real numbers. And I think there'll be a lot of people there at those meetings proposed. And it showcases the excellent work our staff do for our communities. And the air monitoring, costs that, even though it's a cost to our ratepayers, they far outweigh the long-term mental effects from residents, from that home heating and health issues. We see that from older people in the hospitals and that, through years of taking in that bad air. There's just a huge wealth of knowledge here from staff. I just made these notes before, and I note this is a statutory requirement from government. I'm sure if these functions went to a local authority, if there was some form of that, this stuff wouldn't happen. And the costs would treble because, how can you replicate this over 3 councils? Talking of the abolishing the regional council, when you see this as an absolute nonsense, when you see this work, it shows an ignorance and lack of understanding of the organisation. Our lakes and rivers are so important and essential. We do this monitoring work along with the rainfall monitoring and our early flood warnings. It's so important for our community. So for me, thanks Shanti and the team. You do an excellent job, guys, and can never be underestimated. Thank you.
Oh,
Thanks, team.
thank you for listening.
Yeah.
And if you've got any other questions at any point in time, we're all happy to answer those after you've digested the document.
Yeah. I look really forward to the presentation of the community, and I think it's important that gets out and well advertised. I'm sure